Straight talk from Israel. You're listening to Israel News Talk Radio.
Political Hitman.
Hi, I'm Howie Silberger, your political hitman, right here on Israel News Talk Radio. Welcome to the program. Thank you so much for joining me. We have a great show in for you today. It is election time in America, which means that we're going to talk about the election. Now, at the time that we're doing the show, we do the show live. At the time we're doing the show, there is still no answer on who is the next president of the United States. We're going to look at that. We'll look at the different possibilities. And, of course, we will take your calls. In North America, you could call in. The number to call is 301-768-4841. In Israel, the number is 0265000151. You could join me in the chat room. That's right, in the chat room on Israel News Talk Radio. There's so many ways to be involved with this show, and I just want you to be part of it. So just be part of the show. And I want to look. I want to look a little bit at the ramifications of the different choices of the President of the United States. How is that going to affect world politics? How is that going to affect Israel? How is that going to affect Jews? If Donald Trump wins the presidency, or if Joe Biden wins the presidency, how is that going to change things? This I want to look at, and I want to understand a little bit. And of course, I want your opinions, because I know everybody has an opinion on the American election. So I want to know your opinion too. I want to hear what you have to say, and because you know, if you don't call in, and I'm just talking, then it's just me sitting in a room talking to myself. And that's not a lot of fun. So it's a lot more fun to talk to you, and you could join me in the chat room. We could talk in the chat room. You could join me online. Once again, the chat room, if you go to israelnewstalkradio.com, the chat room is right there. And, of course, the numbers are on the top of the page at israelnewstalkradio.com, but I'll give them to you anyway. In North America, you could give me a call. The number in North America is 301-768-4841. The number in Israel is 0265000151. You could join me in the chat room at israelnewstalkradio.com. And I'm Howie Silberger. This is Political Hitman on Israel News Talk Radio.
Always challenging the status quo. Hello, I'm Rod Bryant on Beyond the Matrix here at IsraelNewsTalkRadio.com. I want to encourage you to listen each week, every Wednesday at the same time, for an amazing show that will challenge you, inform you, and inspire. News, views, and wisdom for the nations here on IsraelNewsTalkRadio.com. Don't forget, Beyond the Matrix every week, Wednesday, here on IsraelNewsTalkRadio.com.
Political Hitman.
I'm Howie Silberger, your political hitman, right here on Israel News Talk Radio. Join me in the chat room on IsraelNewsTalkRadio.com, where the conversation is always great, and I'll be there the entire show. You could call in. Numbers that call in are on the top of the page on IsraelNewsTalkRadio.com. Those are the numbers are right there. You can feel free to call in and be part of the program. It is always fun to talk to you and for you to be part of Political Hitman. So it is election day in the United States of America. They are choosing a new leader, a new president, or it could be the old president. They have not. It is now past midnight in the United States, in the eastern part of the United States, and they still have not declared a winner. In order to win the presidential election, you have to hit 270 electoral college votes. So each state has a number. Each state has a number of votes that go to the electoral college, and the president has to win enough states to give him 270 electoral college votes. Now, Neither Donald Trump nor Joe Biden have reached that threshold yet, and it doesn't look likely that they will by the time the show ends. I was hoping that when we got on today, we would have some semblance of who's going to win. It doesn't look like we have a semblance of who's going to win. It doesn't look like we're going to know who's going to win. So I thought it would be fun to look at the different scenarios on what happens if Joe Biden wins, what happens if Donald Trump wins, how's that going to affect the world, how's that going to affect Israel, how's that going to affect Jews in general, and what happens if they tie? This is a question that's been asked me. It was asked me by my students when we were talking about the election, and it is a question that comes up all the time, especially when these elections are this close. What happens if they tie? So we'll address that first. So according to the Constitution, a president must be inaugurated on January 20th. So elected November 3rd, inaugurated the first Tuesday in November, and then inaugurated on January 20th. And what if we don't have an answer and we don't know who is president by January 20th or before January 20th? The Speaker of the House becomes the president. That's really the way it works. Nancy Pelosi will become the default president, the temporary president, until all the court cases are done, until the president is decided. It is a scary proposition if Nancy Pelosi becomes president. Nobody wants to see that. So I'm hoping that they could come to some kind of conclusive decision before then. Now, the Supreme Court of the United States had changed the rules a little bit. There were a lot of mail-in ballots for this particular election, and the Supreme Court ruled that certain states, well, all the states, had an extra week for mail-in ballots. So the numbers that we see right now at this particular second, Joe Biden has 227 electoral votes to Trump's 210 electoral votes. But that could swing, that could change in an instant when mail-in ballots are being counted. Some states count them right away, some states count them at the end. So we don't know. So that is the conclusive answer. So I wanted to take a look at different scenarios. I wanted to see what happens if Joe Biden and Kamala Harris win the presidency. How will that change things from the status quo? So we'll take a look at that scenario, then we'll move on to some of the other scenarios. And, of course, this is all my opinion, so you could have your opinion, too. You can feel free to call in and join me in the conversation. If you disagree with me, even if you agree with me, feel free to call in. Let's talk about it. Number to call, of course, are on the top of the page on IsraelNewsTalkRadio.com. And, of course, you go into the chat room. We could talk in the chat room, too. So if Joe Biden and Kamala Harris win the presidency, I have been predicting this for a while, that if these two people win the presidency, there will be a transition of power very shortly after the election. I do not believe, not for a second, not even for a millisecond, that Joe Biden will serve as president of the United States of America for very long after the election. I believe what I hear. I believe what people tell me. I believe what the politicians tell me. And more than once during their campaign, Joe Biden and Kamala Harris have referred to the campaign as the Harris-Biden campaign, which means that Harris put her name first. President usually puts their name first in these campaigns. So that means that Harris put her name first and Biden's name second. Joe Biden said just last week that he was running as Kamala Harris's running mate, which means that he was, which would indicate that he felt that he was running as vice president, not for president. And just 2 days ago, during a campaign stop, Kamala Harris was introduced as the next president of the United States. This indicates, to me at least, that if Joe Biden wins the presidency, it'll be a feather in his cap. He's been trying to do it since the 80s. And so if he wins the presidency, he could say, I've won the presidency, but I think he will resign and Kamala Harris will take over the presidency not very long after the election. So that's my prediction if that scenario happens. If Kamala Harris takes over the presidency, a radical left-wing agenda will come into play. Kamala Harris has been called and is considered the leftist, the most left person in American politics. So we will see a radical swing to the left for American politics. How will that affect world politics? Well, we have all these peace deals now that Israel signed with the United Arab Emirates, with Bahrain, with Sudan. These peace deals will fall apart without American support. And under a Kamala Harris, Joe Biden administration, if they switch roles, that support will dissipate really quick. The American support will dissipate really quick, and these peace deals, these mutual cooperation deals, will disappear. In my humble opinion, another thing that's going to happen internationally is that the United States, which froze funding for the Palestinian Authority, insisting that the Palestinian Authority step back from terrorism, step back from killing innocent Israeli civilians. Kamala Harris has already said numerous times during her campaign that once they get into office, Kamala Harris and Joe Biden get into office, relations with the Palestinian Authority will be reinstated and funding will be reinstated to the Palestinian Authority, which in real life effect means that the more money that goes to the Palestinian Authority, the more money that is stolen by the leadership of the Palestinian Authority, the more chance of a new wave of terror in Israel. So we are really at the crossroads. Donald Trump cut off funding and cut off ties to the Palestinian Authority. If Kamala Harris and Joe Biden reestablish those ties and give the Palestinian Authority more legitimacy than they deserve, more legitimacy than they have right now, we may just see an increase in terror and more Jewish death. God forbid, but we might see that, and that is a scary part of this election. So there's more riding in this election than just who's going to be the next president. There's a lot of things that have happened. The embassy in Jerusalem under Harris and Biden, the embassy in Jerusalem will be moved back to Tel Aviv. We will regress. We will go back years and years of progress in the Middle East, years and years of progress of peace in the Middle East that have been initiated by Donald Trump and his administration will be erased by the Harris-Biden administration. I'll call it the Harris-Biden administration because that's what they call it. So it will be erased by the Harris-Biden administration. So Kamala Harris as president, Joe Biden as vice president, or Kamala Harris as president and whoever other radical liberal she puts in as her vice president after Joe Biden bows out, will erase all the progress made in Middle Eastern peace. And to me, this is an extremely scary situation. We don't want to see more Jewish deaths. We don't want to see more strife in the Middle East. It is finally relatively quiet. We'd love to see it remain relatively quiet. That would be a very nice thing. This hasn't happened in the existence in the history of the existence of the state of Israel. That has been quiet, and that the Arabs are clamoring to make peace and to have mutual understandings with Israel. But the only way that's happened is with the American backing. Once the American backing disappears, then we're back at square one. Then all bets are off the table, and this is where the problem lies. If Donald Trump wins, we'll talk about that when we come back from the break. It will be a totally different story. And then if Nancy Pelosi becomes president, even temporarily, we're going to see a nosedive in a lot of different areas of foreign policy, depending how long she holds on to that role. Hopefully, it'll never get there, but you never know. When we come back, I want to talk about Donald Trump. If Donald Trump wins the presidency, what will it look like for foreign policy? What will it look like in the Middle East? Let's talk about that when we come back from the short break. I'm Howie Silberger. This is Political Hitman. You could call in the numbers to call in North America, 301-768-4841. In Israel, the number is 02-6500-151. You can join me in the chat room on IsraelNewsTalkRadio.com. And the conversation is always fun in the chat room. I'm Howie Silberger. This is Political Hitman on Israel News Talk Radio.
Shalom, everybody. Making a difference often takes just one moment and one person at a time. I am Orly Benny Davis, your show host on Israel News Talk Radios from Jerusalem with love. You'll be hearing people talking about politics, religion, social issues, and making a better tomorrow. Join me, Orly Benny Davis, for God and Country. From Jerusalem with love.
Wednesdays on Israel News Talk Radio.
Political Hitman.
I'm Howie Silberger, your political hitman, right here on Israel News Talk Radio. Feel free to join me in the chat room at IsraelNewsTalkRadio.com, where the conversation is always exciting. You could call into the show. The number to call, 301-768-4841 in North America. In Israel, you could dial 02-6500-151. If you didn't write those numbers down, don't you fret. Don't worry too much about it, because you could always get the numbers on the top of the page on IsraelNewsTalkRadio.com. Now, when we look at the Electoral College numbers, we look at different maps. Different news sources have different maps and different numbers. Some sources have numbers that are higher than other sources. Some sources have a larger spread between the two candidates. That is because news companies have people who predict what each state's going to go for. So before the count is even finished, they have statisticians who are sitting there predicting the results of the election. So they'll call the states. So CNN might call Minnesota for Trump, while Fox News might call Minnesota for Biden. So the numbers could be skewed depending on which site you look at, depending on which news source you look at, which makes it very confusing for the American people. Now, what will happen if Donald Trump wins the presidency? So before the break, we looked at what happens if Joe Biden and Kamala Harris, or Kamala Harris and Joe Biden win the presidency. Now let's take a look at what happens if Donald Trump wins the presidency. If Donald Trump wins the presidency, we're going to see an increase. We're only looking at foreign affairs, how it affects the Middle East, how it affects us. So if we look at that, you're going to see an increase in the amount of countries clamoring to make peace with Israel. Donald Trump, President Trump, and the United States committed to many of these countries that they will help them out militarily, they will help them out financially. They made all sorts of commitments to these countries in order for them to commit to peace with Israel. Now, some of the countries jumped in full hog. If you take a look at the United Arab Emirates, they jumped in full force, and they seem legitimately and genuinely interested in financial and economic relations with Israel, which is amazing. It's something that we didn't dream would happen before Donald Trump presidency. In fact, if I remember correctly, President Obama said that that kind of peace in the Middle East is absolutely impossible. So it's interesting that the absolutely impossible peace became possible under Donald Trump. Now another thing that we would see if Donald Trump gets another 4 years in the Oval Office, you're going to see a lot of economic investment in the Middle East. So a lot of trade in the Middle East. The United States government's going to work towards creating as Jared Kushner said it. They're going to work towards creating a new Riviera in the Middle East. So they want to create an economic hub in the Middle East, which I think would be great. A unified Middle East would be amazing for everybody, not only for Israel, not only for the Jewish people, but a unified hub in the Middle East would be a unified economic hub in the Middle East would be the most amazing thing to happen in the world in the last century. So I think Donald Trump would be better served as president when it comes to foreign policy, especially when it comes to Middle Eastern foreign policy. He has proven himself that in the Middle East, he knows how to handle the people in the Middle East. Some of the other presidents seem to have a little rough time with that. Donald Trump seems to have gotten the right people in office to be able to deal with the dictators in the Emirates and the rich guys in the Middle East. He speaks their language. He speaks the language of business, so he speaks their language, and so he is able to speak to them on an economic level, which allows them to be able to understand that making an economic peace with Israel and starting trade with Israel and starting an economic and building an economic umbrella within the Middle East is beneficial to both their country and to Israel and to everybody in the Middle East. Now, one thing that we have to understand is that the Palestinian Authority has no authority anymore, and Donald Trump has committed to not supporting the Palestinian Authority, the terror group, the PLO. He said he will not support the PLO. He has proven that by removing American aid to the PLO, by cutting off diplomatic relations with the PLO, which was a step that no other president ever dared to do. He has committed, Donald Trump, and I heard him say it quite a few times over the course of the campaign, and quite a few times before the United States presidential campaign started. He had committed to destroying Hamas and liberating the people of Gaza, the same way he destroyed the Islamic Caliphate in Afghanistan. Afghanistan, Iraq, and in that area of the Middle East. He said he wants to clean up terrorism in the Middle East. And I take him at his word. If he says that he wants to clean up terrorism in the Middle East, I really believe he will. And that is something you're not going to see under a Biden-Harris administration. You won't see the cleanup of terror. You'll see the continued acceptance of terror. We saw that in the United States. They made no bones about it. When Antifa and Black Lives Matter started rioting in the United States and terrorizing U.S. citizens, destroying businesses and killing people, literally killing people in the street. Biden and Harris said nothing. In fact, Harris tweeted out that she supported them. So here you have politicians that support chaos and anarchy in the street, support the destruction of American property and the destruction of American businesses, and you have a guy who is against that. So I mean, to me, the American people, if they elect Biden and Harris as president and vice president, the American people have really a death wish, and I hate to say it, a death wish. And the Jews of America, as I've said in previous shows, should really watch out and if the Harris-Biden administration wins, or the Biden-Harris administration, whichever way you want to put it, they put it both ways. So whichever way you want to put it, if that administration wins, then Jews living in North America really should be watching out for themselves and really consider leaving North America as soon as possible. I can't imagine that life will be pleasant for Americans in North America. Forget about Jews, because when life gets unpleasant for people who aren't Jewish, generally life gets even more unpleasant for people who are Jewish. Now, life in North America, as we've discussed in previous shows, is not that pleasant for Jews already. Wait till Biden and Harris get into office if they win the election. Then you're going to see a real unpleasant experience for Jews in the Middle East, in America, excuse me. And to me, that is scary, and it's extremely scary. You're going to see a very unpleasant situation for Jews in the Middle East too, as they continue their plight to reestablish ties with terror groups like the Palestinian Liberation Organization, as they continue their plight to refund the United Nations and the United Nations that condemns Israel in every step of the way. And as they continue to support these organizations like Black Lives Matter and Antifa, which are causing chaos across the United States, and who haven't yet turned their eyes, but they will, because it's on their manifesto. And if you read their manifesto, I have. Most people haven't. They will eventually turn towards religious people and towards people who are affiliated with religion, because that's what they said. Their idea is a pure socialism, bordering on communism, and their idea is to turn the United States into a socialist communist state. And we all know what happens when countries become communist. The first thing to go is religion. So people who follow religion, people who are traditionally religious, better watch out if Biden and Kamala Harris win the election. It will be extremely unpleasant situation for Jews in the Middle East. It will be an extremely unpleasant situation for Jews in America. And yet, it's still amazing to me, and I'm still gobsmacked by the fact that Jews in America overwhelmingly vote for the Democratic Party. It's just mind-boggling to me. But that's what it is. Now, I invite you to join me in the conversation, if you want, if you will. I invite you to be part of the conversation. Please give me a call. In North America, the number to call is 305. The numbers are on the top of the page on IsraelNewsTalkRadio.com. And you can also click on that button that says chat room, and you can join me in the chat room. Now, I know I give out the numbers. I keep calling out the numbers, and I know you're not writing them down. So I don't know if there's really a point to me calling them out, but let's try it again. In North America, the number 301-768-4841. In Israel, the number is 0265000151. You could join me in the chat room once again on IsraelNewsTalkRadio.com, where the conversation is always happening, always hopping in the chat room on IsraelNewsTalkRadio.com. You could, of course, don't be shy. Be part of the show. I really would love to talk to you. But listen, in all seriousness, getting back to this, in all seriousness, if Joe Biden and Kamala Harris win the election, then we really got to tighten our belts and really watch our backs. I'm Howie Silberger. This is Political Hitman.
You're listening to Israel News Talk Radio.
This is Shai Bentikoa, and each week I'll be webcasting to you from Judea, origin of the word Jew, a people besieged and beleaguered in every generation. Nazi Germany's but a memory, but in its place the world invented the phantom Palestinians as this generation's internationally authorized Jew killers. Tune in for a different slant on life in Israel, Phantom Nation, every Monday.
Hi, I'm Rabbi David Aaron. The soul basics are the most profound, the most essential, and yet often the most neglected in our education. Join me for Soul Talk on Israel's News Talk Radio and discover the secrets to love, spiritual growth, and personal power.
How did a nice Jewish girl from Delaware end up living in Israel? Shalom, I'm Natalie Sapinski. Join me on my show, Returning Home. Meet different people who have moved to Israel. Hear their personal stories, their highs, their lows, and everything in between. Each week, we talk to experts on immigration and the process of moving to Israel. Listen to Returning Home every Thursday, only on Israel News Talk Radio.
Political Hitman.
I'm Howie Silberger, your political hitman, right here on Israel News Talk Radio. Feel free to be part of the conversation. You could call in The numbers to call are on the top of the page on IsraelNewsTalkRadio.com. But, I'll cheat a little bit. I know they tell me not to do this, but I'll cheat a little bit and I'll give you the numbers right now. In North America, the number is 301-768-4841. In Israel, the number is 02-6500-151. Now, I don't think it's ever happened in American history that there was a tie for the presidency and that the Speaker of the House had to step in and become the alternate president until they figured out how to break the tie. I don't think that's ever happened in North America in American history. If it has, forgive me. I don't remember ever learning or ever hearing that ever happened. But you could call in and correct me if you know that it did. But if that happens, the Speaker of the House becomes the temporary president until the Supreme Court and figures out the mess. That would mean that Nancy Pelosi would become president of the United States. She is the Speaker of the House, and she would become the president. And that would probably be the worst thing for America and for the Middle East. Now, I'm not sure how much power. I mean, she would be president, so she would have all the powers of the presidency. But I'm not sure how much policy change a temporary president, a temporary president would be able to enact in the United States, because this situation has never happened. So it's unclear on how much the temporary president would be able to enact, and how much they'd be able to change policy. But I'm sure, I'm positive, I'm almost 100% sure that if Nancy Pelosi became the temporary president, she was able to change policy. Her hatred for Donald Trump is well known. She would try to reverse whatever Donald Trump did. So as President Nancy Pelosi, she would probably order the embassy in Jerusalem to be shut. She would probably reinstate funding, because these are powers the president has, and she would be able to use the power of the office to do this stuff quickly to reverse the Donald Trump years. She would probably reinstate funding to terror groups, the Palestinian Authority, and she would do this. She would do this proudly and quickly as president. She would also issue a group of executive orders, pushing through legislation that she wasn't able to push through Congress, and creating new laws that she was not able to push through the regular legislative bodies of the United States. Now, she would have the full power to do that, because as temporary president, she would be sworn in as president. So although her term would be shorter than the average 4-year presidential term, it could be months before the Supreme Court figured out a tie. So if Joe Biden and Donald Trump each, they need 270 votes to win, but if they each get 269 votes, which is very possible, then Nancy Pelosi would be sworn in as president. If the issue wasn't resolved by January 20th, Nancy Pelosi would be sworn in as president, and these two would be fighting it out in the Supreme Court. And that could take months, and if that takes months, then she's president for months. And she has the full power of the office of the president. So that would be a dangerous situation. I don't know how different that would be from Joe Biden and Kamala Harris winning the presidency. Not so sure how different that would be. It would be the first time in American history that this happened, so it would be interesting to see. As somebody who's interested in American politics, as somebody who likes to observe American politics, I think it would be fascinating to watch this situation if that situation unfolded. But it is highly unlikely that would ever happen. Statistically, it's almost impossible, but in this election here, this particular election, it is so tight that who knows? It could go any way. And that's really where the issue lies. So it would be interesting to see how that plays out, if it plays out. Now, I'm looking at the interactive map, the live interactive map, as they're calling different states, and looking at the Electoral College numbers. So right now, I'm looking at the map on Fox News because they have the most interactive map online. So you could look at it, and it's very clear and it's understandable. Fox News has Joe Biden at 237 at this point in time as we're doing the show. Fox News has Joe Biden at 237 electoral college seats and Donald Trump at 210. When we look at the map, if we do the math, Pennsylvania is worth 20 electoral college seats. North Carolina is worth 15, and Georgia is worth 16. These have not been called for either side. Then you have Minnesota and Wisconsin at 16 and 10 each. So when you look at them, and you try to figure out mathematically who could win, with Joe Biden in the lead, if he takes Pennsylvania and a couple of the other states, he could be president tomorrow. He could be the president-elect tomorrow. Donald Trump, according to these numbers, is at 210. So if he takes Pennsylvania and two of the other states, then he could be president tomorrow. So that's how tight it is. And when presidential elections are this tight, the last time we had a tight presidential election like this was in 2000, 20 years ago, when Al Gore and George Bush were running. And that ended up, remember the hanging chads? For those of you who are old enough to remember this, the hanging chads, and that election ended up in the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court decided in favor of George Bush. So this, the possibility of this happening is really great when it comes to these two candidates. And as I said, the Electoral College votes could change overnight. I mean, they could keep changing as more and more ballots are counted. So it is a fascinating exercise in civil liberties when you watch this. It's a fascinating exercise in democracy. Now we all love democracy. We don't want to live in a dictatorship. Nobody wants to choose to live in a dictatorship. So we all love the idea of democracy. And if you love the idea of democracy, then this is democracy in action. And it's a great civics lesson. I've tried to use this in school with my students. I've tried to use this as an example of how democracy works. And it's a great lesson in democracy. It happens once every 4 years. All elections are great lessons in democracy. Even the ones in the totalitarian states where they hold a gun to your head and force you to vote for a certain candidate. It's a good way to learn what you can and what you can't and what you should and what you shouldn't do when it comes to elections, and what you support and what you shouldn't support. Now, is this election more important than any other election? Well, we do shows on American elections, we do shows on Israeli elections. The America runs the world. That's the truth. They're the strongest, most influential country in the world. So the leader of the strongest and most influential country in the world is extremely important. This is why we spend so much time talking about the Americans, so much time talking about the American election. I get emails all the time saying, Howie, you talk about American Jews and talk about America all the time. Why don't you talk about something Israeli? And I'm saying my answer is always the same. If I talk about America in relation to Israel, if I talk about America in relation to the way that Israel is treated by America, if I talk about America in relation to the way American Jews are treated, I am talking about Israel. American foreign policy to the Middle East directly affects if Israel is at war, if there is terror in Israel, if the terror groups have funding, how many condemnations Israel gets at the United Nations. It's directly affected by the American government. Now, American Jews who claim to love Israel and vote Democrat all the time are not really supporters of the state of Israel. When you look at the record of the Republican Party versus the Democratic Party when it comes to Israel relations, you realize that these Jews that continuously vote Democrat, that continuously vote in anti-Israel democratic politicians, are not serving the Israeli cause very well. No, nor should they. I mean, they live in America. They don't care about the Israeli cause. They pay it lip service, but do they really care about the Israeli cause? if they did really, really care about the Israeli cause, then they would look at the damage that they're doing by electing the politicians that they elect. But they don't do that. They don't do that at all. So here we are. At the end of the show, we still don't have a clear indication on who is going to be the president of the United States after Election Day. Now, Israelis are used to this. I mean, they had 3 elections to choose their prime minister, so they're kind of used to this. But the Americans are usually by this time of night in the United States of America, they are usually watching concession speeches and acceptance speeches. Doesn't look like that's going to happen tonight in America. Doesn't look like that's going to happen. Meanwhile, let's hope and pray that whoever wins the presidency of the United States, whether it be Joe Biden and Kamala Harris, or whether it be Donald Trump and Mike Pence, let's hope and pray that they have the wisdom to continue with the push for peace in the Middle East. Let's hope and pray that they have the stamina to stand up against the terrorists and to continue not funding terror organizations. And let's hope and pray that the way that they treat Israel and the Middle East is with dignity and love. I'm Howie Silverger's Political Hitman. I will see you again next week.
Israel News Talk Radio's chat room. Just click the orange button at the top of the IsraelNewsTalkRadio.home page, log in as yourself or an anonymous guest, and join in on the fun. You'll meet other listeners from all over the world who listen to Israel News Talk Radio, and you can make new friends. Israel News Talk Radio's chat room. It's the closest you can get to being in the studio with us.
We love listening to Israel News Talk Radio.
Where can you get the inside news on Israel? At Israel News Talk Radio, we're dedicated to sharing Israel's inside story with the world by providing our listeners with news on Israeli politics, current affairs, and Israeli Jewish culture. The Israel News Talk Radio homepage also provides you, the listener, with useful information at your fingertips, with scrolling news headlines, weather, currency exchange, Shabbat candlelighting times, and so much more. Our radio programming is always accessible and on demand. We operate absolutely free of charge for everyone, everywhere. If you love what we do, partner with us now by becoming an Israel News Talk Radio supporter. With your support, you'll be inscribed on our Israel News Talk Radio Wall of Fame. There's nothing like us in the world. Be part of something great. Israel News Talk Radio. Straight talk from Israel.
If you love Israel News Talk Radio, then you'll love our Facebook page. We keep you up to date on what's happening in Israel, plus little surprise treasures that we don't share on the radio. Go now to follow us on Facebook. Just look for the Israel News Talk Radio Facebook page, and don't forget to subscribe and follow us by clicking on the like button. We post great stuff there that you'll want to share. Israel News Talk Radio on Facebook and Israel News Radio on Twitter.
News, opinion, and more. You're listening to Israel News Talk Radio.